My name is Simon Rogers. I edit The Guardian's data blog and data store, and this presentation was originally going to be called 10 Ways Data Will Change Journalism, but it's already kind of happening, so I changed what it was called. And my background is as a news editor. I'm not a statistician, a designer, or a techie. I'm not particularly good at maths, to be honest. My maths school report said tries hard, but has little natural ability. But luckily, because we have the tools now, we don't have to have, you don't have to be mathematicians or statisticians or developers now. It's possible to do data journalism. And the main thing, the most important thing, is knowing what a story is and caring about the stories. So I'm going to talk about how we do it. And this is just how we do it. It doesn't have to be how you do it. This is just how we do it. And Antoine, if I talk too long, you'll start telling me to shut up, right?
Yeah.
So, and I often say this, and I apologise if anybody's seen me talk before, because some of this will seem familiar to David, particularly. So, first thing to say is that, we treat data journalism as if it's brand spanking new, never existed before 2008. But data and journalism have been kind of uncomfortable partners. They have been partners for some time. You think of city reporters, finance reporters, sports reporters, people who handle data and have handled data for a long time. And the big editor of The Guardian, C.P. Scott, said famously, "Comment is free, but facts are sacred." And this is the first ever edition of The Guardian. In those days, the news was on the back page because the front page was full of adverts, which I don't think we'd be able to do now. And the first advert on the front page for a lost black Labrador. But the news on the back page, and there on the back page is a table of data. And this is data which would not be controversial now. It's just a list of schools in Manchester and how many pupils they had and what their budgets were. But this was 1821. It was 60 years before education was compulsory in the UK. So basically, most kids, whose parents weren't rich, those children went to work during the week, and they learned to read and write on Sundays in Sunday school. So it was a very, very political issue. And this data was leaked to us. And it was leaked to us by a guy who said this, and I'm going to paraphrase it to say, essentially, if you don't understand what's happening in the world, things cannot improve and they cannot get any better. And that is the kind of rationale for what we do now, I think. It's just that now we have different ways of presenting that data. And this is probably one of the best known of those. This is something which really is a newspaper graphic. It's a flat, non-interactive newspaper graphic, but it's always a big deal when we do it. It basically shows you government spending in the UK by department. Each of those circles is a different department, and it's broken down into the areas. And when we started doing this, we did this because nobody in the UK really understands public spending. It's incredibly complicated. The Treasury, who are in charge of this stuff, make it more complicated because they split it into departmental expenditure limits and annually managed expenditure and capital and resource and all this sort of stuff. Whereas you or I know if you spend €1 or £1, you know you're spending that much, right? But in Whitehall, it's a whole different world. And it shows you things that are going on in the news. So, for instance, this big blue area up here is the Department for Work and Pensions, which is in charge of welfare and benefits. So you can see already that's the biggest part of spending in the UK, followed by the health service and education. And defence, even though we're the world's 4th biggest defence spender, is down here. So it's much smaller by comparison to these big parts of state spending. And for instance, in the UK at the moment, there's a big debate about welfare. And if you ask people what the biggest benefit is, they would say, oh, it's unemployment benefit, or it's benefits that go to disabled people. In fact, the biggest benefit is this big circle here, is state pensions. State pensions is £74 billion a year in the UK, and nobody ever debates it or talks about it or discusses it. So what we try and do is we make this stuff available. In the past, this would have lived as a centre spread in a paper, and then the next day it's forgotten about, right? But now we can make this stuff live a lot longer, not least because getting the data is very difficult. Even in the UK where we're all about transparency and open data, we have to get this stuff from government annual reports which are published on PDFs. And PDFs are where data goes to die. PDFs are not good things, and there are ways for government departments to appear to be transparent whilst not being so. And so every year we do this, and we know, in fact, the Treasury has it on its wall, and we get phone calls from different government ministries like the Central Office for Information who want copies of it because they don't have it. So it's a good thing to do, but it's a lot of work, and it's a very influential graphic now. But again, it's something that, if we didn't do it, why isn't government publishing this information? Well, they're not, and what we can do is kind of bring it to life and make it available for people. How does it work for us? So the first thing to say is a lot of journalism now, this doesn't just apply to what we do, but a lot of journalism now is about curation. It's about being the place to go, and not least because data is everywhere. Okay, there's more data around than ever before. You've got open government data sites, you've got things like Data Market. Has anybody's used Data Market or InfoChimps or Open Corpus? These are sites, websites which publish data all the time and make it available for people. So this stuff is everywhere, and yet it's terribly confusing. So if we can be the place that people go to find this data, that is a really important role for us to have. So how does it work for us? This is some examples from the week. So this is the data store, guardian.co.uk/data, and every day we'll publish stories around data. So if you were looking at the website yesterday, or today actually, it's still on there, you would find a lot of stuff about the budget, which was announced yesterday. Now the budget is one of those things which is really important. It sets out spending the UK for the next year, but all the data in it is kind of tricky, and what are the key charts, what are the places to go to. So we try and bring that stuff out for people. And try and make it available. And the data itself, we publish that data in open formats just so people can share it and do stuff with it. So for instance, we do stuff like this. This is just in the last week. This is was in the paper. It's just 10 years of war in Iraq, how it's been affected, and kind of gathering together key data from all the places and helping people visualize it. But crucially, we write about it as well. We give people context, because numbers on their own are just numbers, right? If you can give them context, then you can make them real for people and you can bring them to life. We do stuff like this is something around the Office of National Statistics in the UK releases mortality figures, tells you what people die of, tells you how many people die from accidents and falling down the stairs and cancer and all this kind of stuff. But the data is published very inaccessibly and difficult, and every single thing you want. So we would kind of go through that and extract it and make it easier for people to use. What we found also is that a lot of the stuff we do that kind of works is stuff that's personal. Trying to make data more personal to people is a really important thing. So for instance, we're doing something about poverty in the UK, and one of the questions we had was, where do people fit? Because if you ask most people where they fit, they will say, oh, I'm in the middle, I'm middle class. But most reporters aren't middle class, really. If middle class is here, you're earning about £15,000 a year, so 20,000 euros odd, and whereas actually most journalists are up here. So we did this thing where you could enter, and the data is a bit tricky and it's kind of messy, so we did this thing where you could enter the amount of money you have and number of kids you have and whether you're married or not, and it would place you on this, and it would give you a category. It would say, I'm on the verge of poverty, or I'm in poverty, or I am wealthy, or I am in the middle. And we had a tweet button there which would allow people to tweet that category, and we had a long discussion in the office, and we said nobody's going to tweet that. Nobody's going to tweet I am on the verge of poverty. But hundreds of people did. People will tweet this stuff about themselves, and it gave people a way to compare themselves to others. And a lot of the stuff that we do that works well allows you to compare yourself to somebody else. Sorry, could somebody grab me some water from the back there? Sorry. And allows you to compare yourself to somebody else. And that's making data, hard data, easier to understand. So for this is something that our interactive team did in America. I don't know when we've seen this, Gay Rights by American State. And it's nice because it's not a map, which is a nice way of looking at it. But also, it had a share button which allowed you to compare your state, if you lived in America, to your Facebook friends. And it had 100,000 shares in a few days. So, making data personal allows, will encourage people to share it, but it will also mean that it's brought to life and it's easier for people to understand. And we do other stuff too. Has anybody heard of Jon Snow? Some of you have. He was this map changed the world. Hard to believe because it was pretty old now. He was born a couple hundred years ago, and he was a doctor and was the inventor of epidemiology. And what he did was, there was, in those days, people thought cholera was spread by, they're called miasma, spread by bad air. And there was a big outbreak in Soho, this is the middle of London. And what he did was he mapped every death. And that's what these bars are. These bars, which you can't really see them particularly well, those little black marks like that are deaths. And he mapped where the water pumps were. And what he found was, up here, you've got a pump, which is on a street called Broad Street, it's now Broadwick Street. And that pump was in the middle of all this outbreak. So he took they took the handle off the pump, the water pump, and the cases almost dried up overnight. So he changed the way that people think about disease and about cholera and so many things, and it's an amazing data visualization that really actually literally did change the world. So this week we thought, well, that's interesting. So what did we try to recreate it? Which we did. We used something called CartoDB to map it now on a modern map of London in a kind of old style. And it's interactive, you can zoom around it. And actually I like the original one a bit more, but there you go. But it just shows that actually, you know, we have tools to do these things, and we can make these incredibly kind of powerful visualizations that I can do. I'm not a designer, but I can make a map or I can make a visualization. And that's a real change in the power shift, I think, for journalists, that it makes you a lot more powerful than you used to be. You don't have to rely on other people all the time. You don't have to rely on an interactive department. You don't have to rely on developers. You can do stuff for yourself. And it allows you to do stuff like this. This is after that meteorite hit Moscow. We thought, well, I wonder if we can find, and we found this list online of every single meteorite that's been discovered that had hit Earth, and it had latitude and longitude, so we whacked it into CartoDB, and it means you can do stuff like this, we had this up in a couple of hours, and people were zooming around trying to find the meteorite that had hit, near their house, whatever. So it's just taking public data and trying to make it more available, and maybe this is a tool that might work for you guys this week with your mapping exercises. And then, I'm still right at the beginning of this talk. I thought I'd talk a little bit about the Olympics, because the Olympics are interesting because it's an area where we, as journalists, are often complicit in very closed data. And what I mean by that is the International Olympic Committee charges an awful lot of money for data about stuff that you can see in front of you. You can see somebody running a race, right? But that data of how fast they ran that track is hidden, and people pay money for it. So we thought we'd try and subvert that a little bit during the games. So this is kind of what we did. So we had a front, London 2012 Olympics data, and if you Google Olympics data, you'll still find it. And every day we would publish stories around data that's in the games. So we included things like this, which was a guide to the money. Where was the money coming from and where was it going to? This is a big issue in the UK because it was costing, every time we got an estimate of how much the games would cost, it went up and up and up and up. And in the end, costing over £9 billion. But the information itself not incredibly open. There was a public body which built the stadiums called the Olympic Delivery Authority. Their data was public. But the people who were running the games, the London Organising Committee, their data was private because they're a private organisation, and we had to wait for them to put a report out. So there's a lot of kind of reporting involved where we investigate and try and find out what different things were costing and then put it together and make it kind of visible and accessible for people. We also did stuff like this where we scraped the results of every athlete's performance in every single games and then just published it as a spreadsheet. Made it visible and open for people to look at. And maybe a fraction of our readers would actually go and download this. But it's more the point that we're actually saying this is information that belongs to everybody, so everybody should be able to see it and use it. And then here's some of the other things we did. So for instance, about day 4 of the games, there was a bit of a panic in London that we weren't winning any gold medals. Team GB weren't winning any gold medals, and we had done in Beijing. And so we thought, well, how does it actually compare? And what if every day we just said, this is how the big countries were doing now compared to the same stage in Beijing? And so obviously the next day we got loads of gold medals, so it was all fine. But we just did this every day, and every day you could kind of zoom through, you could see where we were at the same stage last time. So it was taking the data we could get, which is the medals table, and then kind of bringing it together with other stuff. And then we did this, which was based on this kind of fascination we all have with medal tables. Who's number 1, who's number 2, who's number 3? Where's China, where's the US? But actually, if you're a small country and you win 5 gold medals, then that's got to be worth something, hasn't it? It's got to be worth a bit more. So we worked with some statisticians and Imperial College who created this kind of weighted spreadsheet for us, which would calculate how much that gold medal would be worth if you looked at it by population or if you looked at it by GDP. And so all we had to do was just put the medals in, and every day it would change this score. So that's the official ranking. And then if you look at population, Grenada, with its 30,000 population, but it's one gold medal, shoots to the top there, followed by Jamaica, a lot of small Caribbean countries. New Zealand there, number 4. New Zealand government were doing their own version of this every day. You can see why. And then if you look at it by GDP, again, Grenada is quite a poor country, but North Korea, you see, comes in, and Mongolia, Georgia, all these kind of countries. And then if you look at it by team size, interestingly, China, which did not have a big team at the Olympics compared to, it was bigger than a lot of other countries, but actually compared to US and UK, it was a lot smaller, but they did so well, they still come top, followed by Jamaica, their brilliant performance in all the sprints. This was the most, we just updated this every day, and this was the most popular thing we did during the Olympics. Literally, it was, we wrote about it, we explained how we did it, we gave people the context. But something very simple that was this kind of recurring data was incredibly popular. And we did a lot of these kind of quick hits, things that we could do in an hour or two. So comparing Yi Xuan's swimming record, or if Michael Phelps were a country, how big would he be? A bit bigger than Austria, I'm afraid. And then things like Team GB medal winners, who were, there was a big debate about whether they're all educated in state school or private school. We started doing this, and then it was just fed off a spreadsheet of all the winners. And we found this guy who it turns out is the world expert on where Team GB team members went to school. He had this list of every member and whether they'd gone to a private school or a public school. So we could do stuff with that, and make that data available. I would also showcase things we like this is the Emoto project, designed by a guy called Maurice Stefano, who's just a bit of a genius. And it was live Twitter analysis during the games of what people were looking at, the kind of subjects that were coming up. It was really beautiful, and it worked brilliantly well. So that curation thing's really important. Increasingly, I say, we're becoming data providers as much as reporters. People are coming to us because we'll make the data simpler and easier for them to download and use than they'll get from the official sources, which is an amazing position to be in, that now we get maybe 3 million pages a month, and the Office for National Statistics gets 200,000. So it's a crazy situation where people are actually more people are coming to us for data now than the official sources. The other thing is, obviously, we're getting much bigger data sets. We're increasingly about smaller things, and those smaller things are often about geography and locality. So, for instance, you have something like this, which measures, this is poverty. The red areas are poorer, there's deprivation and poverty. The red areas are poorer, the blue areas are richer. But there's data sets published in a really inaccessible format. It's hard to find out where your area is. That's what you want to know, right? You want to know where you live and how it compares to everywhere else. Are you much poorer than everywhere else? Are you much richer? So we'll make that data accessible. And it involves things like, so it means things like when we get the WikiLeaks data set, this was Iraq, where there were 400,000 odd rows of data. So what can we do with that? Well, one of the things we can do is think, well, what's the story that's going to come out of that data? And unfortunately, the story that came out of the data was just the sheer numbers of people that died. There were 109,000 deaths recorded on this database. So we made this map just using Google Fusion tables, took about half an hour to make. And it just shows there's a dot for every incident where at least one person died in Iraq. It's horrible, but it's also utterly compelling, and it brings the story to life because it allows you to explore the data for yourself, and you can see these patterns of roads where obviously lots of IEDs, and you can engage with the data yourself without being told what to look at and what to understand. I know for a fact, because I've had US military analysts telling me they then use that to show people, to show their bosses, to show their generals, actually this is what's happened with the war, this is where the deaths are, because they hadn't thought of using those techniques. But it's just a free tool. Fusion tables is a free tool that anybody can use. I think, are you doing training on it this week? Are you doing training on fusion tables?
Not very easy.
It's very easy to use. If you want to get into it, if you Google Fusion Tables Workshop, there's a brilliant online workshop which will help you through it. So I was talking to somebody earlier about crowdsourcing. We're famous for crowdsourcing now because of the MP's expenses. Although what we found actually, although it was great for producing stories. We know about this? So basically 450,000 records, and then we asked our readers to help us go through them because we had a day. which is physically impossible to read through the 450,000 documents on your own, but if you can involve your readers, that's great. Great for producing stories and helping people helping us find stories. Actually not so great for finding data this time round. It's taught us a lot about how to crowdsource. It's also taught us about people who are doing it well. So for instance, there's a company called Zooniverse, and they crowdsourced photographs of the moon. Brilliant idea. And what they did was they just put all these photographs of the moon in just tiny areas, like a few meters square, and they asked their readers to help them. But they would have more than one person doing each one, so you get a kind of a community checking. And they also did this, which we ran on the site, which is where it's called Old Weather. It's a great site called Old Weather. It's worth looking up. And what it did was they crowdsourced Royal Naval logbooks, over thousands of these books, right? Because every time, every destination of a ship, every day a ship's captain would record where they were and the latitude and longitude and the temperature. So that's I'll show you quickly. That is where the Navy was during the First World War. So you can see it's 1913 and it starts off there, and then 1914, and then the war's declared, and then you've got and then when America joins in, it just goes crazy just across there. But this is just data from crowdsourcing, and the way it would work is they'd have 5 or so people crowdsourcing each book, so it was kind of community checked, and it really worked, but they weren't in a hurry. Journalists are always in a hurry, and crowdsourcing in a hurry is really difficult. And then if you're successful with your crowdsourcing, you produce a shed load of work for you at the other end, because people come back, they crowdsource and they respond, and then you have to go through it and help. So we kind of have a mixed relationship with it. It's something we want to do. We want to involve our community, but it's difficult and it produces a lot of work for you. But the other thing to say to take that on is that being open about data means being open in your journalism too, and engaging people. As journalists, we used to sit in our ivory towers and tell people what to think, but now those days have gone. Now it's much more of a two-way process. We have to engage people in our stories and get them involved, because then our journalism becomes stronger. So, for instance, now what we do is we publish the news list every day, so you can go on the Guardian website, you can see our news list and which reporters are going to do stories. And this is an example of kind of something, how you can kind of involve the community. But it was unintentional on my part, I was pointing out. So I did this map, which was the poverty map in London. That was my first go at it. And this guy, Gregor Eisch, who's just a great designer from Germany, who was one of the people responsible for something called Data Wrapper. And we've seen Data Wrapper. It's a free data viz tool, and it's just great for producing simple charts in a minute. We use it all the time. We used it during the budget, like about 18 times yesterday. Anyway, he tweeted, take care of your maths. The colours used in the London poverty map is a complete fail. So my first response was, how dare you? I was quite cross about that and slightly pissed off. And so I tweeted back, what colours would you use? Thinking that was going to be the end of discussion. And actually then he sent me back some colours, which were those ones top, and I didn't really like them. I thought they weren't strong enough, so we had a bit of to and fro about it. The map looked a bit like that, which was okay. So he said, what about those colours, which actually I liked a lot more? And then we had a bit more discussion, and we had those colours, and then he sent some code so we could do that, which actually we use all the time. And it's a lot better. So I went from being annoyed and cross that somebody would dare to question what I do, to feeling actually really pleased that he'd done it. And then so what he'd done is made our journalism stronger by people helping us out. And now, this is part of what journalism is now, is working with people so you're not on your own. Now, a side effect of all this stuff is that there are lots of graphics online. This is worth looking at. I didn't make this. I wish I had, because it's really cool. So this is our most popular infographics on the web. Periodic table of something, water, gas, oil, whatever United States consumes more of than any other country, Venn diagram of something, tag cloud with random words in the shape of something. We see these quite a lot. Here we go, world's tallest building alongside something they're building in Dubai. So quite a lot. And then this a crap load of irrelevant data put together in a long vertical image. This stuff. We get sent this stuff all the time. Every day a marketing company will send me a crap load of relevant data in a long vertical image. And the reason they do it is because people don't treat data like they do other editorial. They don't know how to edit, to cut stuff out and to just pick out the key things. They think if you throw everything at it, that'll be interesting. But it doesn't work like that. Data is editorial just as much as words are, and you have to treat it with the same respect and in the same way, and edit stuff out, get rid of stuff you don't need. But at the same time, we're at a time where data is everywhere. This is a page from our Flickr group. Every day, because we couldn't manage the number of people that were sending us graphics, so we set up a Flickr group so they could post stuff on there, because people were just taking our data and doing stuff. Now, it's quite a small fraction of the readers, maybe about 1,500 members, but I love the fact that they'll take our stuff and they'll produce something with it, and sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not, and it doesn't matter to me. This is a diagram from 1977 Punk magazine called Sniffing Glue, and so this is a chord, this is another, this is a third, now form a band. And data journalism to me is a bit like that, because now we have so many tools, anybody can do it, anybody can become a data journalist. And it seems to me it's much more important. It's less about your training, the more about your attitude and more about the way you think about data. And the fact that the tools have improved so much that the graphics on the web have improved from stuff like this to stuff like this using Tableau, Tableau Public, which is a free tool, and it allows you to create pretty sophisticated data viz, that you would have needed a team of kind of interactive people to do this for you a few years ago. Now you can make it yourself, and that has got to be important for us as journalists, right? That we can create more than just a piece, and ask you can create lots of different things now. And you've got academics making interesting charts. This is from the Oxford Internet Institute, and they've got a unit there, and they specialise in geotagged data. So this is Flickr pictures, I think. But they do lots of this stuff, and it's beautiful. It looks beautiful, but it's interesting. It tells you stuff about the way the world works. I'm going to talk really quickly about elections, because I think elections suffer in the same way that the Olympics did from this kind of media thing where we're complicit in keeping the data away from people. So obviously, we had, this is how people used to tackle elections. So this is, I haven't got the audio, have I? This is from, have I got audio? Aha. Is this one working?
It will be in a second.
Right. This is how we used to cover elections in the UK. This guy is just a bit of a genius, the swingometer. And this is how they cover them now. The swingometer's changed a little bit. But what's common about all those things is that the data belongs to the media organisation, even though this is the raw stuff of democracy, election results, right? But it doesn't belong to us, it belongs to people who pay money for it. And we've obviously had a lot of elections in the last year or so. That was the London election, and this is how we get the results. Now these areas are huge, there are millions of people in each of these areas. It tells you nothing about London, so this is the London election, whereas this tells you something. It tells you something quite interesting about different areas and the fact that actually Conservatives tended to win on the outskirts of London, and inner London tend to be Labour. But this stuff is, we get this 2 weeks after the results. They know on the night, we get it 2 weeks later. It seems to me that data around elections, the key stuff of democracy is kept close to us. And this is how we get it when we pay, because we pay for the Press Association feed, and it comes into us as kind of closed data. But that age is over, I think. So for instance, WNYC in New York, they spotted around the Iowa caucuses before the presidential election, actually Google News had the data before AP did. So all these people who paid for AP feeds could have just got it free off Google News quicker. And we're seeing interesting things. This is Hackers in Argentina, who ran an elections thing in 2011 where they basically had live results and they merged it together with social factors about each area and census data and so on. It created this really fascinating thing. It became the place for people to get data. Same thing in Greece. iGraphics was a little design agency. They run this thing now which tells you Greek election results. They did the same thing for the Italian election results. Like 4 or 5 guys, and they're telling stuff quicker and better than the mainstream media do. This is something from the French election last year, Regards Citoyen, which are a brilliant hackers group. They were allowed inside the Interior Ministry in France. And this doesn't look much. What's interesting to me about this is that basically they spotted these civil servants running around with pieces of paper, And what these pieces of paper showed was for each area of France, what the turnout was like at this time compared to the previous election. It was just, they hadn't even thought of it as data. And these guys thought, well, this is really interesting. It tells you where France is voting, and they produced this, and they published the whole data, they made it available, and they put it out there. And does anyone know who said this? The people who cast the votes don't decide an election, the people who count the votes do. Anyone know who said that? Well, Stalin said that. And this is totally relevant to this because, might seem relevant, it is relevant. Because if you can't monitor these real full election results because they're hidden, then as a democracy, how can we work properly? Because then the people who count the votes, they have all the power because you can't monitor them and keep an eye on it. So, opening up data around this stuff is really, really important. And the other thing to say is that working with designers helps too. If you work with a designer, for all the free tools and the beauty of the free tools, working with a designer will give you something that they can't because they will create things that look amazing. So this is stuff done with the WikiLeaks data, the similar kind of data, the stuff we had online. It doesn't give you the interaction, but it gives you something beautiful, which I think is important. The thing to say is you don't have to be a developer, but as I said, but sometimes it helps. So something like this, for instance, we did this during the Libyan bombing campaign. Basically, we were looking for who was pulling the weight within NATO, which countries were doing most of the bombing, and what we came across was this thing, which every day NATO would put out a press release. We just had, last night we attacked 45 targets, 3 in Tripoli, which were, tanks or whatever, 3 somewhere else, and we thought, well, we should just start digitizing that. So we ended up, it was PDF of course, so we ended up having to type it in every day, but we ended up with something which actually is a record of the war in Libya and really told you which place had been attacked most and what NATO thought it was doing. And we know that this was used inside NATO and inside the Ministry of Defence afterwards because it was a record. They actually had a place that this is what we've just done in one place. So working with a developer meant that all we had to do was fill in a spreadsheet, and that was really important to us. So I'm nearly at the end of promise. I don't know how I'm doing for time. Am I all right, Antoine? Okay. So I was going to talk a bit about how we handled the riots last year, because this for me says a lot about the way that data journalism can change and progress, and the kind of levels of stuff you can do with data journalism. So I don't know if people remember this. This was just a year and a half ago. A young man was shot in North London by the police and erupted into rioting, which then kind of spread across the whole of England. It wasn't UK, but it spread across the whole of England. And it was very different in a way to the previous time we'd had big disturbances, which had been in the 1980s. This is 1981 in Brixton, because in 1981, after the Brixton riots, we had to wait for a judge, a guy called Lord Scarman, to come back and tell us what had caused the riots. And in the meantime, you had these kind of rumours and stuff that spread around. The media was allowed to kind of perpetuate things that weren't true and so on. But now what we have is we have social media, and we have breaking news. We have all this noise of stuff coming at you all the time. And that's the big change. And there wasn't going to be a judicial inquiry this time either. So, as journalists, it's our role then to try and explain some of this stuff and trying to make it more real for people. So one of the things we did was this. It's the first time I ever used Fusion Maps, and it's pretty ugly, but it's still the most single popular thing we ever did. It had 1 million pages in 2 days. And the reason it did, all it shows, that each of those dots is an event that we've been able to verify, i.e. because we had a reporter there, or there was a reputable news service there. And each of those events would have, we just say, this happened here at this time of day, this is the latitude and longitude. We allow people to download the data. But we ended up with about 400 odd events, and there were things like places getting loose or whatever. But it meant that we had, basically, if you were trying to get home at the end of the day from work, you would look here because you think, what's happening? What's happening at the end of our road is useful information, but it was also a data set which allowed us to do stuff later on and gave people kind of something they could download and do things with. But then people started to get arrested, and we thought, well, that's interesting. What kinds of people are getting arrested? Are they male, female? Where are they from? Are they rich or poor? What do we know about them? But the problem is that the data, although this is public information, it was kind of kept from us. This is something called the court report, court register. Basically, if you're a court, has anybody done court reporting here? So a couple of people nodding, not so many. It was the same in the UK. In the past, every journalist learnt what they were doing by doing court reporting, but nobody does that anymore because it's not cost effective. People only report on cases that are in the news where they can make some money on it. So, but if you do go to court, you get this thing called the court listing at the beginning of the day. It's a big sheaf of paper, has every case that's going to be on, and at the end of the day they update it and they tell you what happened to that person that day, which is what we wanted. And this is public information because anybody can get this information, and as long as the person in the record isn't under the age of 18, it can be published too if we want to. And what these have is, so it has name, address, what happened, where they were arrested, the date they were arrested there, and they've got a unique reference number, and crucially kind of what happened to them in court. Because one of the questions we had was, were people who were arrested for riot offences being treated more harshly than people who were arrested normally for other offences? How did this stuff work? So we went to the courts and asked for this, and they all said no. One of them tried to charge us £15 a name. We should think there were 4,000 people arrested. Right, so that would have been a bit prohibitive. But in the end, so we went to the Ministry of Justice and asked for it, and they sent an instruction round to every court in the country, which meant that they flooded us with every single case report, not just riot stuff, everything. Well, dangerous driving, shoplifting, all of this stuff just came to us. So we had to then go through all these PDFs again, and pull out and extract the riot cases, but it meant we could do interesting things. It meant at the end of the first week, we had a database of 1,000 people who'd been arrested and in court for riot-related offences. And we can map where they lived, and we could do stuff like this. So, for instance, David Cameron, Prime Minister of the UK, said within 2 days of the riots, they're nothing to do with poverty. The riots are nothing to do with poverty. Well, I thought that's interesting thing to say after 2 days with no evidence. So what if we could look at that? So we took that poverty map, which I showed you earlier, and those white dots here are the riot events where we knew things happen. These red dots, which I'm not sure if you can see okay, are where people lived. These are the home addresses of people who were arrested in a riot offence. And anybody notice a pattern to the colour of the areas that people lived? They're richer or poorer? Anybody? Remember, red is poorer. Okay. So there is a pattern there. And basically we found that 66% of people who were arrested on riot-related offences came from the 10% poorest parts of the country. So that's interesting. And the fact that we can do this within 2 hours of the Prime Minister saying something which probably isn't true is a really powerful position to be in. And that's just using a free tool, just using fusion tables. There's nothing complicated or difficult about it. Once you've got the information, it's there, And then Twitter gave us 2.6 million riot-related tweets. And this became an issue in the UK because people were blaming Twitter for the riots, or politicians were. And so we thought, well, if we can time where tweets happen, did tweets happen after an event or before an event? So these lines show different hashtags. So that's Tottenham, which is the first place. This big one at the end is something called Riot Cleanup, which is where people were going out on the street, taking brooms out on the street to clean up. And what we found was actually, the tweets tend to happen way after people were the events themselves. And so that was interesting to us because it showed that actually people were using Twitter as an information service to spread information around rather than as a come and write here service. And also because we had this list of rioters, we could then do something interesting, which was, this is a picture from Detroit in the 60s, Detroit riots, very, very serious, 45 people died. A journalist called Phil Mayer went out on the streets of Detroit with a group of researchers to ask people why they'd been involved in riots. We thought, we've got a database now, we could do the same thing here. And that led to the Reading the Riots project, which was done with the LSE and Rowntree Foundation and the Open Society Foundation. And basically where we hired a team of reporters who then went out on the street and researchers and went out and interviewed people about why they were involved in the riots. And one of the things they found was when they asked people how you knew where to go, they would say it was either BlackBerry Messenger or watching it on TV. It wasn't Twitter, it was watching it on TV. Breaking news was how people found out what was going on, the people who went out and actually got involved in the riots. And then we're interested in this idea of a riot commute, which is a phrase that the Housing Ministry used, how far people had travelled. But all we had people's home addresses and where they ended up. So we went to a company called ITOWorld, and what ITOWorld specialise in is mapping likely routes from one place to another They're hired by companies to look at how people get from home to the office. I thought, well, this is a model. Maybe we can use that. So, and what we found was in London, people were arrested pretty much about a couple of miles away from where they live, and partly that's because London is a set of villages joined together. It's got lots of centres, whereas something like Manchester, which has a single city centre, people travel a lot further. One guy travelled 29 miles in the centre of Manchester. So a lot of data journalism, I guess, is about finding friends, finding people who can help you tell a story. We couldn't have done that on our own, but then we can work with other people who can and can produce that and can produce something interesting. And then our interactive team, led by a guy called Alistair Dant, did this rather lovely thing with the Twitter tweets, where we're looking at rumours on Twitter, because this thing, Twitter encourages rumours, right? As Mark Twain said, a lie can be halfway around the world before the truth has got his boots on. So what this shows is the green circles are a rumour starting, the red ones are people countering and saying it's rubbish. So that one there, I'll play that again, this is the rumour that the London Eye was on fire, which came because of a photograph of some fireworks going off on the bottom of it. And the London Eye is made of steel, so it's unlikely. And then we've got another one here, which is, this is a rumour that Children's Hospital in Birmingham is being attacked, which was again not true. And you can see it spread suddenly, and then people countering and saying it's not true. There's also other things on there, like the rumour that people broke into a McDonald's and started cooking their own burgers, which I really want to be true, but I don't think it is. And then the next stage of that was talking to people on the other side of the barricades, the police officers and the people in the courts about their experiences. So there's one more thing I'm going to show you from here, which is one of the things we try and do is think all the time about how we tell these stories. And sometimes you get data sets which are just really complicated and difficult. And there are a few techniques we use, and one we've fallen back on, which I will actually now I'm going to. This is a slightly different order thought. And so, how do we tell a story? So this is a kind of a flow chart about how we do. This is kind of our approach, and it's just our approach. It could be anybody's. So often we start off where we've got recurring events or things that happen all the time, like the stuff during the Olympics or the riots, or it might be we've been sent the data, or there's a breaking news story, or there is a theory to be explored. Still, one of the most popular blog posts on the site ever is a list of Doctor Who villains. Nobody knows Doctor Who is a science fiction show in the UK. And we published this list of about 150 villains, and then within an hour we had 300 corrections and additions from readers who were just saying, "Wow, you've missed so and so, you missed this person." So but incredibly popular. And then the key thing is to think, what do you want to do with this data? It's not enough just to have a massive data set and then start panicking about how you visualize. You've got to have a vague idea of what you're going to start. What journalistic question are you going to ask it? How can you make the data smaller and more manageable so you can get something out of it? And what are you going to show? You're going to try and show one thing compared to another, or something changing over time. What kinds of stories are you going to want to tell? Knowing that at the beginning, or having a vague idea at the beginning, really helps, because otherwise it makes it unbearably difficult. And then you get the spreadsheets, and with spreadsheet come all the problems of data being in the wrong format, merged cells, unnecessary columns of data, all this stuff, and then trying to bring data together and mashing data sets up together. ID codes are a real issue for us, because a lot of local areas have ID codes, and those ID codes are really important because things are spelt differently. Is it the Democratic Republic of Congo or Congo Dem Rep? So having ID codes for those places that are unique is important, but it means you've got to have them in both data sets so you can bring them together. And then at the end of it, you can perform calculations on the data, and that's the interesting bit. So the other stuff, it takes 80% of your time is going to be taken up with the boring stuff up here, and 20% is this interesting stuff here. We actually find out what this data is going to tell you. And then the output at the end of it can be anything. People think of data journalism as about producing charts. It's not. That's data visualization. Data journalism is the process of telling a story with data and getting stories out of those numbers. That's data journalism to me. If the output can be anything, the output can be a visualization, it can be a story, it can be a number that tells you something interesting. Did you know that 60,000 tons of horse meat is traded in the EU every year? Now that's not that interesting. It's interesting though in a week when people find out horse meat's in their burgers in the UK, which has happened recently. And then at the end of it, you're able to tell different stories. So That's what I'm going to zip into that in a second. So this thing is where we have a lot of really complicated data and we're looking at a way to tell it, and this is about the 99% versus the 1%. And so we actually lighted on quite an old-fashioned technique, which is animation, animating data. It can really work, and this is still one of the most popular videos we've ever done, so I'll play it. This is just a short clip of it.
Rich people in the U.S. today. In fact, there are now over 3.1 million millionaires. But these are not the richest of all. The U.S. has over 400 billionaires, more than any other country in the world. Who's at the top of that pile? These three have a combined net worth of $131 billion. That's just over the combined budget shortfall of every state in the U.S. for 2011. More than the cost of the global war on terror in 2010.
So that's something where there's just so much data, it needs more than a chart. It needs more. It needs something that actually leads you through the story and takes you there. So I often end with this guy called James Cameron, who's a Guardian journalist, a master kind of storyteller, and one of my favourite reporters of all time. Not the same James Cameron that directed Avatar or Aliens. And he said, the new world will be a place of answers and no questions, because the only questions left will be answered by computers, because only computers will know what to ask. And there is a truth in that. We can ask questions of data we never could in 1821 when that Guardian education table was published. But the root of it is the story. The story is at the root of all journalism, and that's all we're trying to do. All we're trying to do is tell stories, and just now we have more ways to do that than ever before. Thank you, that's it.